to the Greenies. But who owns the Greenies and all these organizations? Who are the people at the top? Remember the Soviet system, that other socialist system that we're now copying? The NGOs. Soviet Med ruled by councils, NGOs. They supposedly were amongst the people, but the leaders were appointed by the Politburo. In the West, in the Fabian system, the big foundations, the parallel government, you see, appoints them and funds them to demand the government do something about this and that, and the government guys come out only too happily because they were waiting for the demand. They both work for the same boss, you see. That's the reality of the world we live in. That's it. This article here, remember Kofi Annan? Remember we had Boutros Ghali, so great, named him twice at the United Nations. Then we had Kofi Annan. Well, he's still at it yet, even though he's out at the United Nations. And he's still pushing this greening agenda. You see, this is the chant, the mantra they're indoctrinating all the youth with today because they must really believe in it to save the world. They bring in this wonderful socialist organized society. This is what he says in a newspaper here, thetelegraph.co.uk. Kofi Annan, 300,000 people die every year from climate change. And the journalist here, James Dinglepole, says, nonsense, in big letters, June the 1st, 2009. 300,000 people are already dying every year as a result of global warming, according to the most comprehensive report ever on the human impact of climate change. It was reported last week. Claim made by a think tank called the Global Humanitarian Forum, set up by the extravagantly besooted ex-UN chief Kofi Annan. You knew it was nonsense. I knew it was nonsense. But what we needed was an expert to come along and explain in proper scientific terminology exactly why it was a ludicrous farrago of unmitigated tosh and drivel. And now one has. Step forward Roger Pielke, Jr., a political scientist at the University of Colorado, Boulder, who specializes in precisely the area covered by the report, disaster trends. Pielke was in no mood for taking prisoners. The Global Humanitarian Forum's report, he says, is a methodological embarrassment and poster child of how to lie with statistics. And he adds, the report is worse than fiction, it's a lie. Pielke goes on to explain why. The GHF report was based on analysis done by a group, GeoRisks of Munich Re. He'd worked with earlier this year at an international workshop of climate change and natural catastrophe losses. At this workshop, it was concluded that, due to data quality issues, the stochastic nature of the extreme event impacts, the length of the time series, and the various societal factors present in the disaster loss records, it is still not possible to determine what portion of the increase in damage may be due to climate changes caused by GHG emissions. And the quantitative link between storm, flood, and loss trends and GHG-induced climate changes is unlikely to be determined unequivocally in the near future. I'm really reading this fast because there's so much here. In other words, all the world's experts in the field, including the report's authors, concluded that there is, as yet, no quantifiable correlation between global warming and natural disasters. Indeed, they believe there is probably no connection whatsoever. The report, he says, is based on a very strange comparison of earthquake and weather disasters in 1980 and 2005. The first question that comes to mind is, why? And then they go through all the different reasons for it and so on, including a lot of the areas where there's been floods and people lost their lives. This is because they've built places now in floodplains they never used to. That's happened in places in the U.S. as well, as local government, that's corrupt anyway, takes bribes from the big contractors and deregulates land for building. The same has happened in Canada alongside rivers. And then when you get the first big flood, away go the houses, and it's a disaster. You don't build in these areas. They're doing that now. He goes through all the reasons why. And then he points out why Kofi Annan is prattling on with all this hype and nonsense and the reasons behind it. Now, what are the reasons behind it? What are they really? Well, Remember the Club of Rome, one of the premier think tanks. That's how it's billed, a premier think tank. And I've quoted this before from their book, The First Global Revolution, written by the two founders of the Club of Rome itself. Alexander King is one, he saw on the go, and Bertrand Schneider. And they were given the task by the big globalist elites to find a way to make a war situation worldwide, something, because under war, they said that humanity came together, accepted massive authority from the government. Government could expand over different areas, that's what they do in wartime, and the people will accept it, will even go into rationing if need be, etc., etc. So what would unite humanity and that would allow humanity to be mastered by experts? And here's what they said in their own book that was written in the 1970s. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. I'll read that again for the harder thinking. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. So the purpose was to find a new enemy to unite them, right? All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it's only through changed attitudes and behavior modification, right, that they can be overcome. So then, the real enemy, they said, is humanity itself, and that's exactly the ploy they're using today. And that fits right in with that other article I just read from Kofi Annan. They're still at it with this hype, and making a killing in profit along with it, and suppressing brand new small businesses at the bottom because they don't want a growing small business economy in this new world order. Margaret Thatcher talked about that. Too untidy. Not so easily to control, you see. Now, since 2001, going along with this whole agenda, you think about all the things that are happening. We're trying to save the planet at the same time that the world's suddenly got into a state of worldwide terrorism. And the suspects, Al-Qaeda, have morphed into white people and blue-eyed people and all kinds of people, according to all the PR put out by the top characters that run all the police and military establishments and the security establishment, the spooks, in other words, the spy community. So everyone potentially is a suspect, therefore everyone's got to get searched, poked, prodded, have their cavities searched and all the rest of it, wherever they're going, and all of their mail monitored, their phone calls, faxes, and email, etc., to keep the world safe. As we're getting hammered with global warming nonsense to change the world again, and a new type of society supposedly will come out at the end of this. That's what it's all about. A new socialist society where you have a world authority, one single world authority, and that's what the United Nations was set up to be. A world authority, the world authority, eventually be in charge of all the world's food, in fact, and the administration of doling out the food to each nation or state, as they like to call it, or region, with the intent in their own charter to reduce the population by not upping the quota. The nations would have to find or implement policies to depopulate, and I'll guarantee you they'll set up a certain figure, and after 2 or 3 years it was not enough food, but they cut it even more. And that's how they plan to bring down the population. It's in their own charter. The speeches are up there by their ministers of agriculture, etc., at the United Nations. But they say, meanwhile, everyone, according to Kissinger, when he defined what terrorism was, in a speech in Europe, he says, what we mean in America by terrorism and terrorists is terrorists are those people who will not go along with the New World Order. And what I've just explained to you is the New World Order. A world run by experts and massive government, from cradle to grave. That's what it is, the Fabian system. Born in London, England.